we had some spoilers for College Football 26 and some player rankings. Now, I think there are some really interesting things here. We can talk about some of the national rankings that came out, but I do want to talk about um, these individual player rankings. I'm just going to move the comments here off so people can see the graphic a little bit better. Jeremiah Cooper ranks out as the top-rated Cyclone at 91 overall, 93 acceleration, 92 agility, 93 awareness. You got Dominique Orange there at 90, Jontez Williams at 90, Rocco Becht at 88, Carson Hansen at 88. That's an interesting one. Dylan Barrett at center is interesting at an 87, considering Dylan Barrett did not play center last year. He played left guard. And from what I understand is he won't be playing center this year unless they know something that we don't. Abu Sama at 86, Tyler Miller at 85, Caleb Bacon at 84, Ben Bramer at 83, Chase Soul at 83. A couple guys here I think that are worth mentioning here, that guys that I would have thought would have been higher. Honestly, this is not a bad pick. Kyle Conrarty was a really good kicker last year. I think that's a really interesting thing to throw in there. I was a little bit surprised. I was a little bit surprised that I don't mean this as an insult. I was a little bit surprised that Abu Sama stuck up there at an 86 because just considering he had a little bit of a tough year last year. Obviously, the athleticism, the explosiveness is all there, but had a little bit of a tough year last year as far just in terms of productivity. But he did break off some explosive runs. So I think I think it's worthwhile. Like, I think Abu Sama is actually that good of a player, but sometimes EA doesn't do a great job of evaluating kind of raw talent so much as they do production. But what they did do is they rewarded Carson Hansen for having a real breakout season there. And I think that's notable. At an 88 overall, 92 acceleration, 85 agility, 85 awareness. I'd have to imagine that like his trucking rating and his power running ratings are probably fairly high. I think that's, I think that's a really nice reward for having a very nice breakout season last year and anticipated to be, maybe the start, probably, the quote unquote starter, which at Iowa State doesn't necessarily mean a ton since they rotate guys so often. But I think that's a really nice reward there. Rocco Becht at an 88 feels about right. That's 82 in the first through third quarters and then a 95 in the fourth quarter. I think another one I think they really did a nice job rewarding here for a good season last year was Jontez Williams. Last year was Jontez Williams' first like major playing time, and he was outstanding. I think he was leading the country in interceptions like into almost into November. And he was a 90 overall corner last year. That's what he played like. But I'm glad that they rewarded him for that kind of season. Since sometimes it takes him a little while to, really recognize guys. Dominique Orange is absolutely deserving of that 90. I would argue maybe even a little bit higher. I'd be curious to see what like his strength rating is and his bull rush and stuff like that. But his ratings are on that. I have to imagine it's significant. Jeremiah Cooper at 91 overall is interesting. I think at his peak Jeremiah Cooper is absolutely deserving of that. Again, another guy that had a tough year last year. He was a freshman All-American, freshman All Big 12. It was really good his sophomore year. Junior year fell off a little bit and was not quite as sound in deep coverage and things like that. So I think Jeremiah Cooper being there is it's an evaluation of what he can be at his peak. And I think that's the goal for this season is for him to be back there. I say this with just a touch of hyperbole, but I really don't think much at all, is that Jeremiah Cooper like has the skill set and athleticism to be a Tyrann Mathieu type of player for Iowa State. Now, he won't return punts and kicks the way Tyrann Mathieu did for LSU, but he can be that all-purpose ball hawk that's all over the field just causing problems. Jeremiah Cooper can absolutely be that for Iowa State. TMFB is in here having a good time. Absolutely. Dominique Orange, big citrus. It's a monster. If anybody is watching this that hasn't watched Dominique Orange play defensive tackle, you're in for a treat if you watch Iowa State play football next year. Dylan Barrett, like I said, Dylan Barrett up there, I think is worthwhile. When he played, he was great. I don't think he's going to be a center this year, though. So that's kind of an odd one. Maybe they may change his position once depth charts come out and things like that. Because as far as I know, the plan would be for him to play left guard. And then I think from what I've heard is that Brendan Black is taking snaps at center. I don't know. Tyler Miller there at an 85 overall at right tackle. Probably worthwhile there. He's been at Iowa State forever. Caleb Bacon at 84. I think last year, I want to say he was an 87 or an 88. Now, he obviously basically didn't play at all last year. So not super surprising that he dropped down. I think that's a guy, along with the guy right below him, Ben Bramer. Both of their ratings are largely just them being victims of injury last year. I think if both of them stay healthy and play up to their potential this season, I would not be shocked to see both of them rise at least into the high 80s, if not the low 90s. Caleb Bacon has all of the tools to be a really elite, all-American caliber edge rusher. Ben Bramer can be the best tight end in the Big 12, one of the better ones in the country. Again, when he's healthy. Chase Sowell at 83 is an interesting one. Obviously, we haven't seen him play, and he just came from East Carolina, started at Colorado, went to East Carolina, and is now at Iowa State. So I think that is an interesting one. I think, obviously we can't see his other ratings there beside the 83 overall, but I think that's an interesting spot, but it shows that there's potential there, but we got to see more. Paul says, who do you expect to make the biggest jump this season? I tell you what, the first guy that I would look at to make a big jump in ratings this season would be Xavier Townsend. And Xavier might be right there behind him at an 82 or something like that. But the way I would say I think is going to use him, they're just going to get him the ball and let him do stuff. I think that's a guy that, I think he'll have a speed rating somewhere in the, mid 90s. I would think his speed rating would be in the neighborhood of like a 93 or a 94, maybe even a 95. I would say it's going to get him the ball a lot, I think, this fall. That's a guy that, if he busts off a couple big performances, I could see him jumping up into the mid to high 80s pretty quick. I really think Xavier Townsend is primed to make a jump to there. Another guy I think would be an interesting name to keep an eye on. Maybe Caleb Brzina, but I think the guy I would keep an eye on there would be Jamison Patton. I think he's been in the system long enough, and he's going to be getting full starter snaps now with Bo and Malik gone. I think that Jamison Patton has a real opportunity to jump up and kind of establish himself as kind of the next great Iowa State strong safety basically. Jake Goldenkamp says I think Cooper is impacted a lot by the linebacker injuries as well as other safeties. I honestly could not agree more. The safeties were having to cover up for some bad linebacker play. So, Jeremiah Cooper did struggle a little bit last year, but I think that's a great point. It certainly was not it wasn't just him regressing or anything like that, or him making lots and lots of catastrophic mistakes, so much as the guys behind the linebackers were just having to deal with a lot of injuries and having to compensate for just a bunch of freshmen that were out there trying to do their best. And, sometimes they miss assignments and whatever. So it's a little bit difficult to deal with that. And, sometimes they get caught out of position. In the end, I think as long as the linebackers can stay healthy and their play jumps up quite a bit, which I would be shocked if the linebacker play does not improve dramatically this offseason. Assuming that makes the jump we think it's going to, and that they remain healthy, I think Jeremiah Cooper goes back to being his normal ball hawking self, and he is absolutely worthy of that 91 rating. So Jamil Patton and Xavier Townsend would definitely be names I think would be primed to jump. Kyle Conradi, if he makes if he makes a long field goal or two, early in the season or something like that, if he goes 5 of 6 through the first few games and makes a 50-yarder, Kyle Conradi could easily jump up there. I would probably pick those 3 as my first ones to jump. I'm not sure. If not Xavier Townsend, then maybe another receiver. If Chase Sowell is really good and he's as advertised, you could see him jump from an 83 to an 88 or something like that pretty quick, I think. So, I think that lots of potential risers on this. Maybe Abu Sama takes off and he makes it, he turns into the explosive back we always knew he could be, and maybe he jumps up to 90 or something like that. Or like I said, maybe Caleb Brzina is there. Maybe Caleb Bacon reclaims his spot in the high 80s by just getting off to a dominant start as a pass rusher on the outside this season. How Cooper Ebel could be a candidate to make a jump there. He was good last season, again dealing with a lot of the injuries. He's one of the only linebackers not dealing with injuries himself, but he was playing against playing with a lot of really young linebackers that had never played before. So, you know, he maybe could have been better if obviously didn't have so many injuries on the linebacker group. Cooper Ebel could absolutely be up there. Lots of candidates. I think Rocco, if he gets his accuracy, if he gets his interceptions under control, I think Rocco absolutely jumps into the low 90s. I don't think that's a stretch at all. So lots of really interesting things there. Brendan Black, maybe on the offensive line, if he has a good start to the season. I don't know how much they adjust offensive line ratings through the season, but Brendan Black could absolutely be one, especially with him moving into a new position. They'd have to look at him and kind of reevaluate him a little bit, even by switching his position. So maybe if he has a good start to the season at center, maybe Brendan Black. I was gonna try to find the I would say the team ratings for everybody, because Iowa State actually came in. Let me see if I can find it. Um, Iowa State came in actually in the. Here we go. Let me pull this on here. Okay. So the overall teams, I would say it's not in the top 25 there. I can't say I'm super shocked. I would guess they're probably an 82 down here with South Carolina and Illinois. And I think Iowa State will be a riser this season. I think there's just a lot of unknowns. However, Iowa State is sitting there at the 23rd best offense at an 85 overall. Carson Hansen and Rocco Beck both being 88 overall, or in the high 80s, I think is a big factor there. And then Iowa State obviously having two offensive linemen in the mid to high 80s. I think that big factors there. But you could have a couple receivers step up. If Xavier Townsend can jump up into the mid 80s and Chase Soul jumps up in the mid 80s, that offensive rating goes up to the high 80s pretty quick. Do not have currently a top 25 defense. My guess is that Iowa State's probably sitting right there at like 82, something like that, 80 maybe, just based on not having a lot of knowns at the pass rushing, on the defensive line, especially outside of Dominic Orange. So, we'll see. And I think these are probably these are like early rankings. I mean, these will change throughout the season a couple different times and stuff like that too. So, take that for what it's worth. I guess you can you can read into it a lot and say, oh, they misevaluated this, they did this or whatever. But in the end, they're a lot of the thing too to remember with this is that they're guessing on freshmen just the way everybody else is, and they're trying to hope they get people right. And they're trying to guess the progression of a freshman to a sophomore and a sophomore to a junior and a junior to a senior. All this, they're doing a lot of guesswork on the evaluations, just like we are. And TMFA is all right. It's all fun. That's exactly right. It is. It's all fun. It's not like the NFL where we get a decade to evaluate a player. Once a receiver has been in the NFL for 5 or 6 years, we kind of know who they are, and the ratings stabilize and they figure out who they are. In college, guys grow so much from freshman to sophomore, and between years of football, and you only get 4 years, 4 playing years of it to evaluate, and maybe soon they'll get 5, but right now they only get 4 playing years. And so sometimes it's hard to project ratings between seasons, and I get that. So it's you can't get on them too much about it, but overall, I think Iowa State's ratings are generally where they should be. But I do think Kyle Conrad, Xavier Townsend, Jamo Patton, maybe Caleb Berzina. I think those are the guys that you could really see jump up, and make them turn themselves into really interesting players on the game. I think Xavier Townsend, even if he doesn't have a super high rating, I think Xavier Townsend will be a really fun player to use on the game. I don't know what they'll get him for abilities or anything like that, but just as far as you're always looking. If you play football games, football video games, getting a really good slot receiver you like throwing to is about as good as it gets. And Xavier Townsend is going to be a speedy, athletic, agile slot guy that you can run on jet sweeps. You can run it. You can send him deep. You can send him on slants, ins, outs, anything like that. He can do all of that. So I think Xavier Townsend will be a really popular target for people using Iowa State online or in dynasties and stuff like that, especially because Xavier Townsend will have a couple seasons left. He's got 3 seasons to play at Iowa State. So if you start an Iowa State dynasty, you'll have Xavier Townsend for 3 seasons. And if you use him as much as I use my slot receivers, he's probably going to climb up into the mid to high 90s in a year or two. Um, and that'll be a good time.